This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I'm Kevin Randle. Last week, I had a bit of a mystery going on. I had talked about a blob of light hovering over a vacant lot across the street. I had no idea what it was. I knew it had nothing to do with aliens. It was not a spacecraft of some kind, although the probe did remind me of the little probe in Earth versus the Flying Saucer that got into the factory, but that's another argument. And I put up on the blog the video from that and asked if anybody had any solutions, let me know. Surprisingly, I got a number of people who told me it was a spider. And I thought, nah, it can't be right. And looking at that, it was probably a spider, and the web, as it was coming down, the strand of silk, I guess, from the spider was causing the looking as shifting around and that sort of thing. And I studied the video carefully, and I believe it probably was a spider. I did not know that could happen because it was actually on the camera that was slightly out of focus. And of course, there's an infrared source in the camera for the night vision aspects of it. And that gave the illusion of it being glowing white blob. And because it was so close to the camera, it looked larger than it was, and it looked as if it was across the street. But I am convinced, because so many people wrote and said, that's a spider on the camera. And a couple of people said, that's happened to me on my security systems as well. I'm pretty well convinced that it was a spider on the camera. Anyway, if you want to take a look at the video, it's still up on the blog. You can take a look at it and see what I'm talking about. It's kind of an interesting little video, but it may explain some of these bizarre blobs of light we get on these cameras as insects right on the lens. I had bees and wasps come up right to the camera, and it's really kind of neat footage, but I didn't realize that at night we would get that kind of thing. So that explains that mystery. It has now been solved. In just a moment, I'll be joined by Dave MARLER, who is, I guess, responsible for what we now call he's the executive director. I'm sorry, I look at my notes. The executive director of the National UFO Historical Records Center. I don't know why I can't remember that name. It's just I can't. He's has a lifelong interest in the subject of UFOs. He joined the Mutual UFO Network in 1990 as a field investigator. Since then, he has served as a field investigator, state section director, as well as the Illinois state director. He's currently an independent UFO researcher. During his tenure with MUFON, he had conducted numerous investigations into alleged UFO sightings and related experiences. He has discussed the subject of UFOs on numerous radio and television news programs, but the most important one would be this one. He has also lectured on the subject to various school and adult audiences over the years. And again, who hasn't? I mean, everybody does that. He is also the executive director, as I said, the National UFO Historical Records Center, which is a collection of material, reports, and a repository for data from around the world. And dozens of UFO researchers have donated their files to the center. And he's going to make a major announcement here in just a moment. David received his Bachelor of Science degree in psychology from Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. I didn't know they had one there. He received his certificate in hypnotherapy from Mottin and Johnson Institute of Hypnosis in St. Louis, Missouri, in case you think there's another St. Louis somewhere. He is a registered polysomnographic technician. I stumbled over that word because it's big and long, and assisted in diagnosing and treating patients that suffered from various sleep disorders for several years at a major St. Louis-based medical facility. He has worked within the medical field for over 20 years, and we're going to touch on this because it does have an impact on UFO sightings. His book is Triangular UFOs, An Estimate of the Situation, and he's probably the world's foremost authority on triangular-shaped UFOs. David Muller, welcome to A Different Perspective.
It's great to be here with you, Kevin. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Did I get that polysomnographic
Polysomnographic technician.
Yeah.
It's a technical term, basically sleep technician.
Well, I know, but I want to make sure I pronounced it right or got the correct pronunciation out there.
People stumble over it all the time.
I would not be surprised. I've mentioned a couple of times now your National UFO Historical Record Center. Tell me a little bit about that and what is going on that is sort of a major announcement.
It is a major announcement. In fact, other than just local TV news last night, you were the first person I'm talking to with an audience about it. So I'm really excited to kind of give you this exclusive, so to speak. When I first got
and I
involved
certainly appreciate that, by the way.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's only appropriate given our shared passion for UFO history, which I know we're going to talk about. But really, it started in 1990 when I got involved in UFOs. I've told the story on a number of occasions. I naively went to my local libraries to check out books on UFOs, and to my dismay, there were none, maybe one if you were lucky. And so I decided back in 1990-91, well, if I'm going to have a library of books, I'm probably going to have to create my own, much like what's behind me and what's behind you. But I didn't realize that in later years, and by that I mean the last 10 to 15 years, I started garnering collections from researchers that were either to a point in age where they needed to find a succession plan, or they were faced with health issues, or they unfortunately had passed, and I was contacted by family members. So it was kind of a snowball effect, essentially. All these collections started migrating, and much like physics, the larger the body, the more the gravitational mass. It just seems like the more collections we get, the more they keep getting pulled in. In fact, I was just presenting to an audience on Monday, and I stated that this collection is organic. It's not static. It's constantly evolving, constantly growing. As evidence of that, the most recent acquisition we just secured 2 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, I went out to Cleveland, Ohio, and loaded up the case files of the Cleveland Ufology Project, which was headed up by Earl Neff. Also, the case files of the UFO Research Committee of Akron, Ohio, that was headed up by George Popowich. And these case files go back to the mid-1950s, upwards to the mid to late 1960s. In addition, we also secured the personal collection of my friend Rick Hilberg and the collection of the late Richard Lee while we were out there. So just in the last 2 weeks alone, we secured another large cache of UFO case files. But some of the largest holdings we have, and I think since we spoke last, I have an update on this. We are curating the files for the Center for UFO Studies, which of course include the Nightcap files, but also CSI New York case files. Since the last show, though, last November, I was very honored to be in a position to be offered the Lost APRO files. And so sitting behind me off camera here, we have 13 file cabinets of APRO case files, correspondence, as well as their organizational and business files.
Well, what's interesting about this, and I'll bring up the Level-Land book that I had done. As I was going through the Level-Land materials, I found a reference to Air Force officers being on site that night with the sheriff. Mm-hmm. And they were close enough to the sheriff's car. The sheriff said that he'd seen the object in the distance, a streak of light, according to the Blue Book files.
Yes.
But when you look at the interviews he conducted prior to the Air Force investigation, then years later, he got much, much closer and described an object rather than a streak of light. And the next day, the police mechanic inspected his car. And the only reason they would have done that was because his car stalled. Mm-hmm. And this becomes important simply because behind him in another car was the Texas Department of Public Safety, and behind them was a car with Air Force officers in it. So you've got these three cars and they were all stalled. So there's a much stronger case there. The Air Force said it was ball lightning. But by going through this older material, you come across those nuggets and you don't know what's buried in those files.
Well, speaking of that, I knew you were going to mention Level-Land at some point because we both love that case. I just thought I'd share with you and your audience. Here's the original front page Level-Land Daily Sun News. And there we have Sheriff Weir Clem in the center picture.
Yeah, I've always disliked his name. Well, I mean, he sounds like such a rube.
Yes.
If he had a name like, "Hi, I'm Tom Armstrong," that would have been great. But
the great thing is with unique names like that, you never forget them because you can't confuse them with anybody else.
Yeah, there is that. But I only mentioned Levelland because it kind of demonstrates some of the things by going through the old cases that you can find. And the other thing that's interesting is that the the Project Blue Book files, of course, were redacted before they released into the public arena. Yep. But many of the CUFOS files that Hynek got were not redacted. So the names are there.
Yes, and we have those files here as well that we're curating currently. What I find interesting, though, Kevin, is we look at these cases like Levelland, for example, and that was, of course, November 2nd into November 3rd in 1957. Then fast forward in time at White Sands, about 24 hours later, you had military personnel that reported a UFO, which we have tons of documentation on. And then November 4th, the afternoon of November 4th, we had the James Stokes case, of course, in Oro Grande. We have the original Alamogordo front page newspaper on that over here as well. And then most recently, though, I discovered in Hynek's files on the evening of November 4th, there was a sighting at Kirtland Air Force Base that involved radar, and 2 seasoned Air Force personnel were observing this object that actually violated the base perimeter and was hovering around the tarmac and restricted areas. They described it as looking like a car standing vertically on end with a white light at the bottom. And the object had the ability to move, immediately reverse direction, hover, and then rapidly accelerate. And by rapidly accelerate, it left Kirtland Air Force Base at a climb rate of 45,000 feet per minute. The official Air Force explanation that was actually written on the copy that we have, it was probably a private pilot that mistook Kirtland for a private commercial airstrip. And when they realized after flying around it was military, they took off. Well, I was looking, and I think the climb rate of a Piper Cub aircraft back then was around 450 feet per minute, not 45,000 feet per minute. So, but what you see is, and what I always try to convey to audiences is, we can't look at these cases in a vacuum. Sometimes you see a succession of very high profile, well-documented cases in a fairly localized area. In this case, West Texas and New Mexico.
Well, in my investigation for Levelland, I'll just throw this out, I did actually talk to one of the MPs who were involved in the White Sands aspect of it. So,
Really?
Yes.
Oh, fascinating.
He was like 900 years old at the time, but
it's been a while.
Yeah, but I did have an opportunity to talk to one of the guys there, and kind of gave me his impressions from what had been going on, as opposed to the Air Force announcement that he'd see Venus landing on the at Alamogordo or at the White Sands. We're gonna have to take a break. We're gonna have to take a break here. We really didn't talk much about the archive, so we'll get back to that. We kind of got diverted into UFO sightings, which we'll do more of as well when we come back. My blog is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and the website for the archives is www.mufohrc.org. So I'll give that several times here in a few minutes so that people can get it written down right. But we'll be back right after this, so please stick around. And I am here with David MARLER. He's not really here with me, but we are together through the internet.
In spirit.
25 years ago, you'd have never thought that we'd be doing radio shows and television in various locations together through the auspices of the internet. His website is www.nufohrc.org, and that, of course, is National UFO Historical Records Center. So you can take a look at what's going on there on that website. And mine, of course, is kevinrandle.blogspot.com, where there's a lot of good information and some that turned out not to be quite so good. But we try to rectify that as we can. When we went away, we were kind of talking about what you were doing there with the archives and how that was going on. And you're gathering all this material from sources around the world, actually, and collections that took decades to create. The APRO files is an important attribute. The NICAP files are very important as well. The CUFOS files, there's an awful lot of data there. And of course, the Blue Book files that are online. I think in today's environment, we can unredact them because enough information is out there that allows us to put the names back in the cases. But all of that information is now in one location. Why are you gathering all of this information in one location? How can people access it?
Great question. And the short answer and simple answer is it's part of history. And I am a history buff in general, as I know you are, Kevin. And I think every aspect of history should try to be preserved. And I felt like I was in a unique position working with some of the leading archivists and historians who were looking to find a succession plan for those collections to bring it all together. Let's have one location where people can do research. And I was remarking to a colleague the other day, with the addition of the APRO files, which again, the importance of that can't be understated, getting that collection after 35 years of it being locked away, essentially. Now, when people come to us and say, I'd like to see the Socorro file, we can very confidently come back and ask, which file? Would you like the APRO file? Would you like the NICAP file? So it's interesting because we have these disparate UFO groups over quite literally decades, as you know, that were collecting all of this material. I don't think in a million years, Jim and Coral Lorenzen with APRO or Kehoe or Richard Hall with NICAP would have envisioned that decades later, all of this material would be brought together. And from a historical research standpoint, I mean, it doesn't get much better than that when you have all of these original case files brought together. And I'm here to tell you, and hopefully we can touch on some of it later, we found some incredible insights into cases we knew about and new wrinkles or new features of cases that we thought we knew about.
Well, the interesting thing is, and you brought it together, I think there was a lot of animosity between NICAP and APRO.
Yes.
During the years, so there was not a lot of sharing of the data. Although on a personal note, I was a member of APRO, and my friend Bob Cornett was a member of NICAP, and so we shared all that data back and forth from them, and we'd done that on purpose for the UFO investigation. We didn't both have to belong to both organizations; we could gather it that way. Jim Lorenzen actually described Bob Cornett and me as his two best investigators. The irony being that Bob Cornett was not a member of APRO.
Well, you've given me
the Project Blue Book files and the CUFOS files. The Socorro case, Lonnie Zamora seeing the landed craft and the two alien creatures, getting it from the APRO perspective and the NICAP perspective and the Air Force perspective gives you a really unique insight into that whole case.
It does, Kevin. And as you can appreciate, these various groups were investigating possibly at different times. So when NICAP was on the scene, or Ray Stanford, who had provided some material to NICAP back then on the case, they may have interviewed witnesses or interviewed character witnesses related to Zamora. But then later APRO comes along, they interviewed other people. So when you bring that cumulative body of evidence together and information, you get a much more holistic picture of some of these cases by bringing all these elements together. And like I said, we've even found some surprises along the way where Project Blue Book and other investigators failed, other organizations succeeded. Mentioning Socorro real quick, I was going to share something with you that I haven't shared publicly. We found that they had a very extensive case file. APRO had an extensive case file, not just on Socorro, but on what I always felt was an kind of represented case, the La Madeira case, that the Air Force wrote off as a drunk eyewitness, Mr. Orlando Gallegos, up in northern New Mexico, who reported seeing a very similar object. And what was intriguing is, and I have it right here because I thought this might come up in conversation, you can see we have letter from New Mexico State Police to Jim and Coral Lorenzen. And not only do we have the letter, and Kevin, I think will appreciate this as a historian, we never had detailed information regarding the La Madeira case. David Kingsbury with the New Mexico State Police in the APRO file, in the correspondence, provided Jim and Coral Lorenzen a hand-drawn sketch of the landing site and the burned area and the surrounding area. In addition to that, he also provided color photographs of the landing site. Now, the main area that we would go to for the La Madeira case were newspapers as well as the Project Blue Book file. But if you recall, the La Madeira case occupied essentially one page. It was 2.5 pages dedicated to the La Madeira investigation, if you can call it that. And I feel that they summarily wrote off Orlando Gallegos. Ironically enough, though, within about 24 to 36 hours, based on the original letters from the state police, Martin Vigil and David Kingsbury were on the scene interviewing Orlando Gallegos. And when you read these letters, they make no reference or inference to the fact that this witness was not credible or that he was drunk. And so this gives us new insights into this secondary case related to Socorro.
Well, one of the other points that is interesting, that Hynek was, of course, in Socorro and learned about that case, and he wanted to stay on extra days and go to La Madera to investigate it. And the Air Force said, no, you're there to do Socorro, you come on home. And I think we see that through any number of cases in the Project Blue Book files. Ruppelt got off the airplane in Washington the morning after the sightings there at the Washington National Airport in 1952, and realized there was something going on, and his orders only allowed him to stay in Washington for 1 day or 2 days, and he wanted it extended. And they said, no, if you'd stay there, we're going to count you as AWOL. And I found a couple of other references where Ruppelt wanted to do something and be involved in a case, and he was denied permission to do that.
Yeah.
And so you've got the Air Force investigation going on, allegedly to find out what's going on in the world of UFOs, and they just denied Ruppelt the opportunity to do that.
And that's an important point you bring up, because I know people paint with a broad brush with regard to Project Blue Book. And some people say there's even no value looking at Blue Book. And I've always disagreed. I've always stated you don't have to agree with the Air Force conclusions. But as you know, going through Hynek's files over the years, there is good information contained within those files. Just ignore the Air Force conclusion and formulate your own.
Well, one of the other things is there was a case from March of 1952, which I may have discussed last week. I got involved in looking at it because there seemed to be some kind of electromagnetic effect involved. Mm-hmm. The Air Force said, well, we investigated it March 29th. We talked to people who were in the area. They didn't see anything. Nothing was going on. It's probably not a good case. Turns out the case really took place on March 14th. So their investigation missed it, but Barry Greenwood supplied me, and probably supplied you too, with information of newspaper clipping from the time that mentioned the same witnesses the Air Force was talking about, but also 2 other witnesses that had come forward independently before any of the publicity got out. So there was good information in the case file. All you had to do was ignore the date the Air Force said it was, ignore the investigations that were predicated on the idea it was March 29th, and look for the earlier stuff, and it became a very good case. Not one that you'd want to write off, but it was something that the Air Force just ignored because it, I guess, didn't fit into their narrative.
Well, and you mentioned 1952. It just tripped my memory. One of the things that Barry Greenwood, since you mentioned him, and I went in and actually conducted or engaged in last year, there were microfilms that were at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base at Project Blue Book headquarters. And Herbert Strentz was a journalist back then. He later taught journalism, actually in Iowa, ironically enough there, Kevin. And he went to meet with Major Quintanilla with regard to his thesis that he was working on, which we have a copy of now in the archives here. And it was on...
Whose thesis? The
Herbert Strentz.
His thesis as opposed to Quintanilla's book.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, let's make a distinction there. Herbert Strentz was writing his thesis on the American media's attitude and reporting on UFOs and flying saucers. He scheduled a meeting with Quintanilla, showed up at the appointed time, and was in the waiting area, and Quintanilla was running late. And so while he was standing there, he's looking at some file cabinets, and they had these little yellow boxes, which we have now over here in the archives, about 32 rolls of microfilm. And he was looking at these, and Quintanilla comes rushing in, and he apologized for his tardiness. His previous meeting had ran over, and Herbert Strentz stated, "Oh, that's fine. I was just looking at these boxes that you have stacked up here." And Quintanilla proceeds to tell him, "Oh, those were microfilms that we made of news clippings that we gathered in 1952." And if you recall, Kevin, Ruppelt references that they subscribed to a news clipping service in 52 to keep up with all of the reports and all of the newspapers. He said, we didn't have room to store them, so we eventually microfilmed them later in 1952. And those are the microfilms. And he said, we were actually getting ready to discard them. And he looked at Strentz and said, would you be interested in those? And
yeah.
Lit
Please,
up like
put them in my car.
He said, he goes, that's why I'm here. He goes, my thesis is to document the media's coverage of the UFO subject. So Strentz walked out of Wright-Patterson with all of these microfilms. And then later in years, met with Barry Greenwood. Barry received them from Strentz. And then now they're residing here. but they've only been on microfilm. Last year, we digitized all of these rolls of microfilm, literally hundreds, Kevin, of 1952 news clippings covering not only the DC roundabout sightings, the Washington, DC sightings, but other sightings across the country.
Well, I did a book called Washington Nationals, cleverly just updated and sold to Russia, by the way, which dealt with that activity and talked about how the sightings built into July of 1952, which resulted in my very favorite banner headline on a newspaper from the Cedar Rapids Gazette: "Saucers swarm over Capitol." Banner headline. I'm thinking that's right out of a science fiction movie if I've ever seen one.
Oh, absolutely. I have one over here off camera from Arizona Republic. Jets put on saucer alert. 24-hour watch to blanket U.S. And that was in the wake of
There you go. We're going to get back into that in just a moment, and some of these interesting sightings. I'm going to have to take another break here. And once again, your website is www.nufohrc.org. That's the National UFO Historical Records Center. And mine, of course, is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And when you're interested in the Washington National sightings, as we were just talking about, as I said, I did a book about that, and that there's more information available on my blog. Interestingly, I talked to Dewey Forney and Al Chop. I mentioned this simply because they were in the radar room on the second night of the Washington Nationals, and I got their takes on what they were seeing, which is not quite what the Air Force would have you believe. So been able to gather some of these interesting insights myself. As I say, we'll be back right after this with David Muller talking about UFOs, but not UAPs, and having a good time. So please stick around. And I am here with David Muller. We're talking about UFOs in his archives. And one of the questions I have not gotten an answer to yet, I'm going to ask it again. You've just signed a deal with the Albuquerque School District for the storage of the archive.
Specifically the Rio Rancho public school system, which is a suburb of Albuquerque. For those that aren't familiar with the New Mexico area, yes, we literally had the meeting on Monday with the school board. This has been a work in progress, Kevin, literally over the last year and a half, working with city, county politicians. And in those meetings, ultimately, it led me to the public school system. And I have to commend the school board and Michael Baker, the chief operating officer. They saw the vision that we had of preserving this as history. We're going to be provided with 2,600 square feet within the public school system building to actually have all of this material not only stored, but now we can expand and have room to bring in volunteers to really expedite and speed up the digitization work we've been doing with a lot of this material. I think it's an unprecedented partnership to have this much history related to the UFO subject now in partnership with an educational institution. I must be very clear, though, because both the school system as well as our organization want to emphasize this. We are not here to indoctrinate kids into believing in UFOs, aliens, extraterrestrials. We want them to appreciate the history of the subject predicated on original documentation, as we were discussing earlier in the show. But more specifically, we want to take it beyond UFOs. UFOs is a starting point. We want to use it as a springboard. I think you'll appreciate this, Kevin, to teach the kids about how radar can be affected by atmospheric phenomena, such as temperature inversion, how it can affect radar, how optics can be involved. Physics of optics can deceive people into thinking they see UFOs. I like to say it's not going to be so much just about UFOs, probably more so about IFOs, as you were talking about at the top of the hour with your little light hovering over the yard. These are things that we can teach the kids about, but also critical thinking skills and the investigative process, how we as legitimate investigators go in and try to deconstruct some of these cases, ultimately to find a prosaic explanation with the understanding there's a smaller subset that still defy explanation after trying to do that.
And a general public, how can they access these files if they're wanting to do research? How do they get involved with that?
Absolutely. The best thing is to go to our website and contact me directly. We will have a physical archive that will be here in Rio Rancho as part of the school system. We are in the process of having those buildings renovated. Our tentative move-in date will be August of this year, and we plan to have a grand opening ceremony with politicians, the school board, tentatively an October timeframe. But we understand that not everyone lives in or near New Mexico. And so that's why we're doing the digitization work. And we hope to secure funding for a major project. Now that we have the facilities, the next step is to secure funding to get a secured server and upload literally terabytes of material that we have, Kevin, in the form of films, videos, photographs, audio recordings, case files, correspondence, news clippings. We want to upload that so everyone will have access to it worldwide. And I might add, in this day and age of ufology, at no charge. We're not here to charge people. We're not here to make money. My philosophy has always been the information, the knowledge belongs to everyone. It should be no different than a traditional library or historical archive. If you want information, you should have access to it regardless of your financial status.
So these files, the digitized files, will be online and will be searchable in some fashion?
Once the funding's secured, to get the secured server and to hire someone that would be an IT specialist to help us, because it'll be a huge undertaking. I don't welcome that. I'll do all the other stuff, but I'm going to have to relegate that to someone else. So that's not my wheelhouse.
Well, you said you've digitized an awful lot of the material and that sort of thing. Have you made much progress on that? Is there still literally terabytes of material to be digitized?
We have so much, Kevin, but to our friend that we alluded to earlier, Barry Greenwood started digitizing the historic CSI, NICAP, and CUFOS files. I continued that when those files were relocated here in November of 2020. My daughter is actually helping me prep the files. As you can appreciate, there's rusted staples, paper clips, there's glue that has basically disintegrated. So we have to use acid-free glue sticks to put those news clippings back on the backing sheets, remove all the staples. It is tedious, laborious work. But in doing that, now that we'll have these facilities, we already have all of our high-speed scanning equipment. We just need more square footage to actually do the work. So the point is we're primed and ready to really expedite that. And Dr. Mark Rodiger with CUFOS, who we both know, he is anxiously awaiting the conclusion of that project. And I will tell you and your audience, the next project I have in mind, large-scale project, once the NICAP CUFOS files are scanned, my goal is to digitize in color the lost APRO files and make those available.
Yeah, I contributed heavily to the APRO files at one point. So,
well, and Kevin, you mentioned that you were an investigator. I have a homework assignment. You mentioned that we have all of the membership forms, all of the resumes, applications, and even ID photos of all the members and investigators worldwide. I'm going to go in those files. I'm going to find your application and send that to you.
I actually still have I just found the ID card the other day and going,
really?
Boy, is that guy young.
Well, I'm going to look for you in the files. And if I find anything,
I should be there. I should be there. What about MUFON? Are they involved in this at all?
They're not involved in this at all. Admittedly, MUFON would be the other data set that's out there, at least as far as United States ufology. I think, they have their own mission, their own goals. But as I was remarking to someone, with no disrespect to MUFON, much like CUFOS, much like NICAP, and I think you'll agree, Kevin, they were never created as a historical archive. All of these organizations were created as an investigative research organization. We take pride in the fact that we are truly the first organization whose mission is to be an archive, to be a resource for the general public and the UFO research community.
So the files that MUFON has developed over the years are not going to be available at this time. Is there any discussion that maybe at some point everything will be linked together?
Well, we were going to actually reach out next year. As you can appreciate, we've been busy with securing the facilities, but we were looking at 2025, trying to reach out to MUFON. Rob Swiatek, who's on my board, of course, is on the board of MUFON as well. So we have an easy way to facilitate trying to get a meeting scheduled. But we also have a lot of filming coming up. We've got the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, who will be out here in 2 weeks, and then later in 6 weeks to do filming for a major documentary that's focused on the history of the subject. And when they found out about what we were doing and what we were doing with the public school system, they were extremely enamored with incorporating that into the documentary. So between that and rallying our volunteers, and as you can imagine, moving an archive of this size and getting it organized, I'm going to be extremely busy between now and January 1st, 2025.
Well, you won't be bored anyway.
And I have a family and a day job, I might add.
And you're gathering materials from all around the world. It's just not the United States. It's all around the world that people are sending you their files.
Yes, and I'm glad you bring that up, because we really created the organization. The inception of it was to have a national archive focused on United States history, the NICAP, the CUFOS files, the APRO files, things of that nature. But we now have individuals from some South American countries reaching out, expressing interest in possibly donating their files. And my friend Philip Mantle in the UK, back in March of last year, shipped an entire pallet of UK case files, correspondence, and publications out to us.
What about the language problems?
Language problems are somewhat met in the sense that I do have an individual, his name's Diego Diaz, that lives here in Albuquerque. He and his girlfriend have been helping me tremendously with the archive. Diego is fluent in reading, writing, and speaking Spanish and English, so he can help translate Spanish material, about 80% Portuguese as well. But I will share this with you. The APRO files, for example, no surprise, there's a lot of foreign material in there, specifically South American countries. I was very happy to find that material, but I was also happy to see, in most cases, through the work of Dr. Olavo Fontes and later Irina Granchi in South America, much of the material that APRO received. So it was nice that all of this material was received, but also translated into English.
Well, I was thinking that you get into some of the European countries, you've got Swedish and German, and
there's where we run into issues. There is no international translator, unfortunately, yet.
Well, I think they're working on that. I just saw something about that, so it might be something you'll have to look into. But you're getting materials from European countries. What about Africa? Anything coming from Africa?
Nothing directly from Africa. However, I do believe we have some African material through the collection that we acquired a few years ago from Mr. Antonio Huneas, who had a vast worldwide collection of UFO material, including some files from Russia.
Well, I think wasn't it Cynthia Hine, who was an APRO investigator? She lived in Africa, but she spoke English, so I guess that wouldn't be a real problem.
Right. Yeah. And in fact, to be clear, we haven't even had time to systematically go through all of the APRO files. So to your point, we may find some African case files embedded in there. It's just an amazing treasure trove to secure this. And in fact, the individual who donated the files, Mr. Brian Myers, will be coming out in 2 weeks as well. It's going to coincide with the Canadian Broadcast Corporation being here. And yeah, we have our carpet being worn out with all the traffic coming through here. He is coming out because he contacted me about 3 weeks ago and stated, David, I thought I brought everything out. I just found roughly 1,000 more case files from APRO. I found original material from Dr. Hynek, and I also found some information from the group ICUFOR, International Center of UFO Research, that he and Tina Choate had put together. So we have another cache of APRO material coming out in 2 weeks.
What about the Air Force files? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that didn't make it into Blue Book. Have you tapped into any of that? I mean, Barry Greenwood would be a person to help you with that, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. The one I referenced earlier in the show is this one from November 4th, 1957. This is one of the lost Blue Book files. And as you mentioned, Kevin, earlier, we have the file itself, but we also have Hynek's commentary and marginalia on some of these reports, which I think it really gives us interesting insights. And I mentioned the next scanning project would be the APRO files. The third project would be scanning all of Hynek's original material. I think it's very important, even though, as you alluded to earlier in the show, the Blue Book files for the most part are out there, but I would like to do color scans of Hynek's material. As you may recall reviewing those, Hynek characteristically usually used a red felt tip marker when he was making his commentary. So I think it's important to scan those in color so people can clearly see Hynek's commentary, which, as you know, were directly at odds with some of the Air Force investigations. In fact, we mentioned Levelland, Texas. There was a case back in 1957, nothing to do with the Levelland case that you wrote your book about, but two individuals, a couple, saw two top-shaped objects moving over Levelland that were belching smoke or steam. And the official Air Force explanation was aircraft. And you read the report, and it contradicts itself. In one paragraph, it states that there were no military aircraft in the area. However, it could have been a such and such jet interceptor piloted by Captain so-and-so. So the two paragraphs don't jive with one another. Hynek very astutely pointed out, was the pilot flying two jet interceptors? Because the witnesses described two objects, not one.
Well, let me break in there because I'm going to have to take my break. You've run a little long, so I can't do a long commentary. I'm here with David MARLER. We're talking about his UFO archives and some interesting UFO cases he has found. www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and I will be back right after this. And I am here with David MARLER. We're talking about UFOs, basically. I have a question for you. I did a radio show on KTSM AM in El Paso, Texas, a number of years ago, mid-1990s. 2-hour programs interviewing a lot of UFO people. Is there a place for that sort of thing in your archives, these radio interviews with UFO researchers or witnesses or archivists?
Absolutely, Kevin. I'm glad you bring that up because quite often I fall into the trap of talking about documents and documentation. But to your point, we have various media covering the 75 plus years of the history of the subject. One of the things that I love, and directly off camera here, is my audio studio. I have 2 reel-to-reel players as well as cassette players, micro cassette players. I've been digitizing reel-to-reels dating back as early as 1953, 1954. Some of these recordings that have survived. The NICAP audio holdings consisted of that. I was able to digitize, but not only digitize, digitally remaster. Some of these recordings that we now have, MP3s, are actually better than the original recordings because now, as you can appreciate, we can filter out all the white noise in the background. A lot of people recorded radio shows. You get the 60 cycle hum in the background. With Audacity software, we can easily go in and filter that out. And some of these recordings are pristine. So yes, audio is one of my personal favorites. I always like to say Barry Greenwood's the document guy and I'm the audio guy. So I'm often.
What about films, movies?
Yes, in fact, I have something right here I was going to share with you. The collection from Rick Hilberg, something that I brought back in my carry-on luggage because I didn't want to put this in a pod and subject it to the heat traveling across the country. We have a number of 8mm films of UFOs. This one is from 1961. This one is from 1966. And this one, ironically enough, is the Moline, Illinois case from 1967, the motorcycle cop, Bill Fisher, who filmed a UFO. I mention that because when I was with MUFON back in the early 2000s, I was invited up to Moline, Illinois to give lectures to the school kids. And while I was there, one of my hosts, who was a state section director, said, "Hey, my wife knows this police officer who had a sighting back in the 60s. His name's Bill Fisher. You want to see if we can get together and have dinner?" So I actually had a chance to have dinner and interview Bill years later after his sighting.
And I will admit that I have talked to him as well, and I have a copy of that movie as well.
Yeah. It's
not spectacular, but it's still a movie.
Not at all. But he was a great gentleman. He was very generous with his time. I appreciate him later in life, spending time and sitting down to dinner and talking to me about his sighting.
So it's a multimedia mix of materials that you've got there.
It is, and I've got to share something special with you. Talking about different types of items, we also have artifacts, historical artifacts. During one of the earlier breaks, you mentioned a name right before we went to break, Mr. Dewey Fournay.
Yes.
Major Fournay.
Major, yes.
I want to share this with you. This is, if you can see the name on the top there.
Oh, my goodness.
This is the original military attaché case per Dewey Fournay that he took to the January 1953 CIA-sponsored Robertson panel meeting.
Where they explained away UFOs.
Exactly. But I received this courtesy of a researcher who was able to become friends with him later in life. And as a result, I was able to acquire that.
Well, when I talked to Dewey Fournay and Al Chop, one of them, and I don't remember who it was, said something got very gory, but he wouldn't tell me what it was. And so I was talking to the other one, and I said, well, Al said something got really gory. What was it? And he filled me in on it. I'm not sure who wouldn't talk about it and who did, but my transcripts would show all of that.
Yeah.
But Al Chop, I bring this up only because Al Chop, there was a movie called UFO from the 1950s.
Oh, yes.
And Turner Classic Movies had broadcast that, but had broadcast a number of times. I had a videotape of it. And Dewey Fournay, Al Chop said, I haven't seen that movie. And so I made a copy and sent him because he's in the movie as or an actor playing him was in the movie because he was in the
Tom Towers, who was a California newspaper man, played him.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. He did play Al Chop. That is correct. So I mentioned that. Quickly, surprises in the files that you've come across, things that really kind of surprised you.
I have one teed up for you because I thought you would really appreciate this, Kevin. Admittedly, a lot of people report UFOs, and most of those sightings are visual observations. And as you and I know as investigators, visual observations are wrought with issues. I talk to police officers all the time, and they say, yeah, if we have a car accident, we have 6 witnesses, we're going to get 6 different interpretations of what took place. What I like are when we have objective measures. And as you know, Jim and Coral Lorenzen, who were civilian contractors when they were here in New Mexico in the mid to late 50s, worked at Holloman Air Force Base. And it had been referenced over the years that they had a lot of inside contacts by working at White Sands and Holloman Air Force Base. What I was surprised to find, though, as I mentioned, I haven't had a chance to go through these files in detail, but I did find this. This is an original, and I got to put my cheaters on here, unknown radar track report from Kirtland Air Force Base. And the summary, I'll be brief, on the remarks of the cover sheet, and this is the original, at first thought to be electronics interference, but was ruled out because of the speeds, course, and so many stations picking it up. A total of 4 radar stations track this UFO. Now, on the back is a grid map showing the direction, showing where the radars are located. But in addition, we have a letter from the individual, so we have the name. We know it was an individual at Kirtland that provided this, but this is what he reported. That on the night of September 13th, 1959, an unknown object was picked up by radar about 120 miles below the international border in Mexico. Within 12 minutes, this object had crossed the border and disappeared 200 miles inside the United States. Speed was timed at 32 miles a minute for an average of 1,920 miles per hour. Fastest speed was clocked at 2,445 miles per hour. Now, I mention that because this was September 1959. I did a little research and I found this little ad for the Convair F-106, which in December of that year, just 3 months later, broke an airspeed record at 1,525 miles per hour. So that was the fastest aircraft that we had at the time. Yet this object was tracked on 4 radars, not only moving in a straight line at that speed, Kevin, it made 7 angular maneuvers at those velocities. And I cross-referenced this to see if Blue Book had a file on it. This is the only documentation I think we have because there was no Blue Book.
Were there any eyewitnesses to this object?
No, and that's I haven't done a systematic search of all of our news clippings, but to your point, I looked at it, and when you convert the Greenwich Mean Time, it factored to be about 10 in the morning. So it would have been a daylight occurrence. So it's quite possible there could have been witnesses, but I haven't had the time to really do a deep dive to find any type of correlation in the newspaper accounts from the time period.
Well, one of the things it's kind of key something for me. One of the things I noticed going through the Blue Book files is an awful lot of it says case missing, case missing, case missing. And I thought it would be interesting if we could figure out what those cases were and why they were spectacular. And I've got an index that does not have the names redacted, so I could put the names with the cases. Unfortunately, too often in the index it would say civilian military, and that doesn't help at all. But there were some cases with names were involved. And I asked Barry Greenwood about this.
I was going to mention that. Barry had mentioned that you guys are corresponding on that very subject.
Yeah, to see if we can figure out what some of these cases are and why they might be missing from the files. It may be just lousy secretarial work on their part. I know that classified material has to be dealt with a little bit more stringently than just regular correspondence, and a lot of the case studies were not classified at all. They were basically in the clear, but some of this stuff should be showing up. And we do know that some of the Blue Book material was classified, because we can see where they were marked out.
And I always emphasize, in fact, in our press release with the school system, we talk about the fact we have original military documents documenting UFOs. And I put in parentheses, to be very clear, unclassified reports.
So that case with 4 separate radars being involved is very important, because you've got independent witnesses after a fact, and it involves instrumentality, a word I love, instrumentality, dealing with it as opposed to humans course, then you get the human interpretation of what these instruments are showing.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I mentioned on a recent Albuquerque TV news segment, I discussed this case, and I stated if it was one radar, I don't think we would be too impressed. In fact, there's 2 other cases involving single radar, which don't impress me, to be quite honest with you. 2 radars is intriguing, but you could still chalk that up to maybe atmospheric phenomena, temperature inversion. 3 radars is getting compelling because, again, these are distributed throughout the state of New Mexico, so they're converging on this target. You get to 4 separate radar stations tracking an object moving at those velocities, making those angular turns. As it reflected in the report, based on the confirmation, they considered it to be a serious report.
Did they offer an explanation for it at all?
The only thing that's referenced on the cover sheet, they use the term UFO, and I would use it in the literal sense. It's an unidentified flying object of some nature.
And you said you'd looked at the Blue Book files and there's no mention of it at all.
The first thing I did, as you can appreciate, Kevin, I went into the Blue Book archives and I'm looking to see, does this correlate date, time, location with any sighting? And no. So this original report may be the only account that we have of this particular instance. And again, that was just discovered in the APRO files.
Oh, well, Cora Lorenzen did have a lot of interesting sources that provided her with information. So
exactly. So it didn't surprise me in that sense. I always felt that they would have more inside sources at Holloman, but apparently based on this, they had, because there's 3 others as well from Kirtland.
Well, once you get inside the Air Force tent, you end up with a lot of different sources.
Exchanging of information.
David, anything you would like to say in the last minute or so here?
No, I just would like to say that there's a lot of statements out there on the internet now by the 17ers, people that came into the UFO subject in 2017. A lot of derogatory comments about history and about old ufologists, and people saying, well, all the information's out there on the internet. As evidenced by this case, Kevin, and this is just one of thousands that we have, we don't know everything, and you can't derive valid, credible information from the internet. And talking about the La Madeira case, this is new information, new old information, I like to call it, that is just now surfacing. So there is importance in preserving and centralizing these historic files.
Well, that also relates to that March 29th, 1952 case I was talking about, because we have the Air Force file, and it's not impressive until you realize they investigated it on the wrong day, and there's independent witnesses to the whole thing. And that was something that just came out by reviewing the file and then Barry Greenwood's help. David, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it, Kevin. It's always great chatting with you.
Oh, I know. We can probably go on for hours longer.
Let's do a marathon show someday.
Okay. Thank you much, David. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
You have a good day. And once again, that was David MARLER. I think the organization that he's creating there, what he's doing there is very important, especially when they get it all digitized and online so it can be researched or accessed by people from around the world. And we can find an awful lot of interesting stuff in the files if you go through them carefully. I stumbled onto that March 29th case by accident, but by looking at the Air Force file and other information I was able to gather with the help of Barry Greenwood, learned that the Air Force explanation wasn't very good, and it probably should be an unidentified case. So there's stuff that we can learn by going through the historical information and may provide us with additional information or additional answers at some point. Once again, that was David MARLER, and his website was www.nufohrc.org. And mine is, of course, kevinrandle.blogspot.com. Can't even remember that. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be with you later.